So there's something I wanted to talk about, which is free speech and the First Amendment, because people are really seeming to fail on this really hard, and I want to explain what the fuck is going on and sort of explain some of this stuff, because a lot of people really seem to be just proving that they don't really understand anything. So the First Amendment provides you with the right against the government clamping down on your free speech, on your freedom of speech. Obviously, there's certain caveats, such as direct threats of violence, libel, and slander. However, for the most part, the vast majority of speech is protected by the First Amendment. So there's a difference between having freedom of speech somewhere and then it being enforceable by the First Amendment. So what do I mean? So, with this example now that we have of the NFL, they're obviously not promoting free speech. They don't have a policy of free speech, right? Because they're now fining and punishing their players if they take a knee. So they're not having free speech. It's like any platform that, in any way really censors anyone does not have a freedom of speech policy. Now, if there was a platform, like let's say YouTube, you could post anything you want, say whatever the fuck you want, that would mean that they have a policy of freedom of speech. So it would be freedom of speech. But if they were to decide the next day that we're not going to have a policy of freedom of speech, that we're now going to be silencing certain people, that doesn't mean that it's enforceable by the First Amendment, because the First Amendment doesn't apply to private businesses. It only applies to the government. And so just because that is the case doesn't mean that freedom of speech is not a thing. Okay, freedom of speech is a thing. It's a thing. It is a thing. And so when people like Paul Joseph Watson say, YouTube doesn't support free speech, he's right in that case. Because it's honestly embarrassing for really a business to do that in most areas. Now, I think that there are certain areas where free speech should be upheld, like when it comes to kneeling, but when it comes to freedom of speech, there's different things. But essentially what I'm trying to get at here is people are seeming to mix up the idea of free speech and the First Amendment. So the First Amendment does not apply to private businesses. You're correct on that. And when people make the argument, when liberals make the argument that, no, the NFL is being unconstitutional when they do that. No, the Constitution doesn't apply to them. Come on, man. This is like civics 101. Come on. But when it talks about the concept of free speech, which is what Republicans claim to support, Dave Rubin claims to support, Tomi Lahren claims to support, etc., etc. But then when this happens, they go, hey, when your employer is saying what you're saying, I think Tommy said pout on your own dime or some shit like that. Like, that's not what you claim to support, bitch. You claim to support free speech, or free speech, as they say. That's different from the First Amendment and, pout on your own dime. Well, you would be pouting on your employer's dime if you were to really actually enforce free speech. So, really quick summary of what I'm trying to say. Free speech can exist in businesses, especially in certain areas. It's not just because, if it's just if you're just at a place of employment, that doesn't mean that freedom of speech doesn't necessarily exist. It can exist. Now, is the freedom of speech provided to you by the First Amendment apply to the private business? No. But that doesn't matter. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. I understand the three words, freedom of speech. It says the right to express any opinion without censorship or restraint. So a business can apply for the principle of free speech by saying, you can say whatever you want, we're not going to restrain or censor you. That can still exist, and that's what Republicans support.